Welcome to another episode of the .NET Show. In this episode, we're going to talk about Windows 64, the new 64-bit version of Windows that can take a standard 32-bit application and allow you to rewrite it to enhance it to run on this new 64-bit system, thus getting faster speed and more memory access and a lot of other features as well. But before we get into that, let's check in with Erica and the news.
Hello and welcome to the MSDN News Update. I'm Erica Wiechers. In early April, Microsoft released a new community forum site. This release makes available a popular threaded discussion platform with the advantages of Microsoft.com's security, scalability, and customer profile data management. Based on the 2.0 version of the ASP.NET Forums codebase, the forum site was extended to include Q&A handling, passport authentication, integration with the Visual Studio 2005 Beta 2 Help Viewer, and several other features. On April 14th, Microsoft and Dassault Systems announced that they will collaborate to support Microsoft's Extensible Application Markup Language, or XAML, format in Dassault Systems' 3D Extensible Markup Language format. XAML is the format for Avalon, the code name of the next presentation subsystem for the Microsoft Windows operating system. On April 18th, Microsoft announced availability of Visual Studio 2005 Beta 2, Microsoft.NET Framework 2.0 Beta 2, and the SQL Server 2005 April Community Technology Preview. The Visual Studio 2005 Beta 2 release also includes the first beta release of Visual Studio 2005 Team System. Because of broad customer demand to work with these pre-release products today, Microsoft also announced the Microsoft Go Live license program for customers interested in deploying Visual Studio 2005 and SQL Server 2005 Express Edition immediately. On April 19th, BEA Systems, IBM, Microsoft, and TIBCO Software announced they will submit the latest version of the Web Services Reliable Messaging Specification, comprising both protocol and policy assertions, to the Organization for the Advancement of Structured Information Standards for further refinement and finalization as a web services standard. WSRM has received extensive industry support and interoperability with a number of implementations beyond the authoring companies as a result of a series of feedback and interoperability workshops. And this has been the MSDN News Update. I'm Erica Wiechers.
Welcome back. Now, like I mentioned, today we're going to talk about Win64. Now, for those of you who are back in the days of moving from 16-bit to 32-bit, when we switched from Windows 3.1 to Windows 95, you might remember some of the issues we had with taking and creating applications that now ran on this new architecture. Well, we're back again with another version of the architecture coming up with 64-bit. And here I've got Larry Sullivan and Volker to talking about exactly what this means and what application developers need to focus on, move their applications from this 32-bit application world to this new 64-bit application world. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Pleasure. So, like I mentioned, we had this time where Windows 3.1 ran on 16-bit, and we moved to 32 bits with Windows 95 and Windows NT, and I was part of the team that evangelized a lot of ISVs on how to do this movement across, and there were some pain points involved. It wasn't just quite as simple as a recompile or something like that, and just for one thing, convincing people that why 32 bits was better than 16 bits, and convincing people why they needed to take and spend time moving into their application code yet again and evolving it to this new 32-bit world was something we spent an awful lot of time with ISVs. So I'm assuming you guys are doing that same sort of thing today with ISVs, moving from the 32-bit world to the 64-bit world.
Yeah, one of my main tasks is to work with ISVs, with our ISV partners, and with our Microsoft field on helping them to understand the benefits of the 64-bit world, of 64-bit computing, and also helping them to migrate existing applications, mainly Windows applications, 32-bit Windows applications, to the new 64-bit platforms. And like you said, it is the next step. So we came from 16-bit to 32-bit, and it was kind of painful. The API changed, and the memory model changed over and over, and there was something like an intermediate step for Win32S that was introduced. And all I can say since I've seen the Win32S and Win16 days, all I see is today when moving from 32-bit to 64-bit Windows, it is nothing compared to migrate from 16-bit to 32-bit. It is so easy. The API hasn't changed. There are, I think, 5 or 6 API calls that have change parameters in order to accommodate 64-bit pointers. But other than that, the API is just the same. So from a developer perspective, all the tools are available or will very soon be available, talking about Visual Studio on a 64-bit platform. You can develop for 64-bit like you develop for 32-bit, and in some cases, there might not even be code changes necessary. In most cases, there are where stuff like pointer arithmetic, for example, is heavily used, and pointer casting to ints, etc., which works very well because on 32-bit, because everything is 32-bit on the 32-bit world. This may cause some issues in the 64-bit world, but we have tools, and our partners have tools in place that help developers to make the next step, to take their applications and change their code so that it can be compiled for 32-bit and 64-bit.
Well, hopefully none of them are doing pointer arithmetic, because that's one of the things I remember I specifically told them not to do when we moved from 16 to 32. So I'm sure none of my ISVs are doing that.
So they are very well prepared then.
So, I mean, but it sounds like then it's just a no-brainer. I mean, I just recompile my app and bang, I'm done.
In most cases, that would be the case. There are, like Volker said, a few gotchas along the way, but they're minor, and they're usually things that you've elected to do yourself. And then one place to go even further, talking about Visual Studio, is of course moving to the .NET Framework. We've just released the beta of the .NET Framework for our 2.0 version, which supports 64-bit natively. And there, IL doesn't care whether you're 32-bit or 64-bit. It's the underlying runtime, and we'll take care of all that for you in the runtime. So you can actually build a C# app, run it on 32-bit, take the exe that you built that's IL, move it to a 64-bit platform, and you don't have to do anything. It just works. Now, there are some gotchas there, too, around COM objects and things like that we've tried to talk with ISVs and tried to talk to different partners about. I've done a number of presentations for Volker walking through a lot of those kinds of things. I mean, there are a few, but for the most part, it just works. And unless you're very deep into the OS and taking advantage of like specific things that are happening in the OS, if you're just using the APIs and writing a sort of standard application, you won't have any problems. There are underlying things that we had to change. The architectures are different. So under the covers, we're paddling like crazy. But at the API level and above, yeah, it recompiles normally what it takes. And if you're writing managed code, might not even have to do that. Might just be able to just move it over and run it.
Yeah, yeah. If you want to summarize it, you can almost say that there is no real migration from 32-bit to 64-bit. In many cases, it is just a recompile. Of course, the necessary testing needs to be done on the new platform. It is a new platform, and for some platforms like the Itanium platform, one of the 64-bit architectures we support, it is very important that after you build your code, especially talking about unmanaged code, that you optimize your application for the platform. And this is a necessary additional step, but in terms of source code migration, it has never been easier.
So, I mean, if it's so easy to take a moving application over to be a Win64 application, what are some of the issues that a developer might want to think about as to whether or not they choose to go to Win64? Like, is it for everybody? I mean, if I'm a developer at Boeing or a developer at Adobe or a developer at Ford Motor Company, am I just going to say, hey, I'm going to do 64 and that's it?
So a lot of it's going to come down to what you have in your enterprise or what you have in your company as to whether you want to make the move right away. One of the advantages, especially of the x64 platform, is that your 32-bit apps are going to run pretty much at the same performance. You're not going to see a performance penalty, and in some places we see a performance improvement. Running your OS is 64-bit, but go ahead and running those 32-bit apps. There are specific kinds of apps that right away you're going to see just a big bang performance-wise moving to 64-bit if you're memory constrained, right? If your application, the reason you start to see performance is because you start thrashing on the disk. And if you could just put more memory on a machine, which nowadays is pretty cheap, and then have all your data in memory, and that's going to buy you something, it's almost a no-brainer. You got to do it. If you're doing high-level computation, CAD work, or you're doing anything where that 64-bit mathematics, the floating point, that kind of stuff is something that's important to you, it's almost a no-brainer. Because you're going to get the benefit out of the platform, and that's kind of the base sort of what you get when you get this new platform. Other kinds of applications, a little bit more time frame, as your enterprise moves and stuff like that, you might decide that some applications you don't move because maybe it's something that's on desktops that you don't expect to move to 64-bit right away. The interesting thing is, 64-bit's not going to be one of these things where you got to think, oh, I'm going to have to go buy this whole new architecture. What's going to happen is over the next year, the machines that you're buying today from all the major hardware vendors are going to be having chips in them that are 64-bit capable. You might still be booting the 32-bit OS, but you're going to have a machine that's 64-bit capable. So, as your corporation does sort of a turnover of machines over the next few years, your whole organization's going to become 64-bit ready. And sort of that's where, if you were in a corporation, you want to do it. For ISVs and such, you're going to, depending on what your application is doing, you're going to want to look at it. But if you're doing, video editing, if you're doing things like that, my home machine's a 64-bit machine, so I'm already there. I'm running the 64-bit client OS. My wife likes it because she can load up tons of pictures inside. Even as a 32-bit application, she can load up a lot more pictures because even the 32-bit application gets all of the 2 gig space. So even though it's a 32-bit app, she's getting some benefit out of the fact that we're on a 64-bit machine, just doing photo editing. And so those kinds of things people are going to see benefits from, and those applications vendors are going to want to look very seriously right now at taking advantage of that and seeing what they need to do and what that story is going to look like for them.
Now you mentioned these machines are going to be 64-bit capable. Now, is that the same thing as saying it's a 64-bit machine? Or is there something different between being 64-bit capable and being a 64-bit machine?
The chip can do 64-bit. You alluded to the switch from 16-bit to 32-bit. It's kind of the same thing. When you bought your 386 or your 486, you could run Windows 3.1 on it. Windows 3.1 is pretty fast on some of those machines. But you could put Windows 95 on it and you'd be 32-bit, or you could put NT on it and you'd be 32-bit. These new chips, the x64 especially, these new chips with the x64 ones, they are 64-bit chips, but you can boot a 32-bit OS on them, and they run everything as 32-bit. Or you can put a 64-bit OS on it, and now it's truly a 64-bit machine. And you can still run those 32-bit apps because the processor handles those 32-bit instructions just fine. So by capable, I just mean it can be either one, but it depends on what you do. If you still put a Windows XP that you get today, 32-bit one, you're not going to be able to run 64-bit until you get a 64-bit OS to take advantage of it. But it's there and it's ready to go. It's just sort of in your back pocket, ready for it.
So it might be better to say it's a 64-bit machine that's 32-bit capable. So you can,
It's almost like that.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Now, are these new machines going to cost more? I mean, they're going to be like twice as much as a 32-bit machine. It's like, twice as much bits, twice as much bucks, It's,
Well, yeah, it's more than twice as much bits. And the cool story is that you can buy today 64-bit capable, like Larry said, 64-bit capable hardware for the price of 32-bit hardware. So there's
so why would you want to buy a 32-bit machine then?
Exactly. Very good question, especially in the light of being compatible with 32-bit OSs. So they can run, from their perspective, from a 64-bit perspective, down-level platforms like 32-bit platforms. And on top of that, running a 32-bit Windows OS on an x64 hardware is even more interesting for enterprises and for developers and for end users, because Microsoft has, with its key partners, a program in place today. And once we ship our x64 support in a very few days, you will be able...
Very few days from when we're filming this, but by the time this actually comes out, it's going to be done.
This will be done already, exactly. So talking about today, you can go and trade in your 32-bit Windows license that has been bought for an x64 platform, traded in for a 64-bit license at no additional cost. So you have, as a user, as an enterprise, as a developer, you have the choice whether you want to move to 64-bit.
And asking why, I wouldn't. My laptop's a 64-bit laptop. My home machine's a 64-bit machine. All of our build machines are 64-bit machines in our group. Just about everything we do now is on a 64-bit machine. So we're not really buying, pure 32-bit hardware anymore. We're buying exclusively, x64 hardware if we need a machine that can do either, and then Itanium hardware where it's necessary, where we're wanting to do that work. And then the other thing that's neat is with virtual PC, you can actually run the 32, if you actually really want to run the 32-bit OS and sort of have it look like that, you could run the 32-bit version in virtual PC on the 64-bit machine. If you don't want WoW emulation, you really want to see what it's going to look like. And some of our testing, that's exactly what we do. We'll take a 64-bit machine, boot it like that. We really want to see, let's say, we're testing for Win9X, for example, one of the things we'll do there is we'll actually run it in a virtual PC instead of running it natively on the hardware. And that gets us a lot of bang out of those machines. We pile a ton of hardware, a ton of memory in it. We can run a number of virtual PC sessions, and we sort of get 4 machines for the price of one. It can be, we can buy maybe we buy a big quad proc, put bunches of gigs of RAM in it, run a bunch of virtual PC sessions. We get a lot of bang for the buck. That machine's not that expensive compared to, previously, and then what we can do with it because of the memory availability, where before we might be limited with that because even though the OS was 32-bit, we could run some virtual PC. We still ran into memory pressure and things like that. We can now, do a lot more testing, do a lot more stuff like that. So if I'm an ISV, I'm also looking at that thinking, wow, I can go buy one of those boxes instead of buying 4 machines, throw some stuff on it, get a lot broader matrix of testing and running and development for a fraction of the cost, really. So there's lots of neat things you can do with these machines.
Yeah, very interesting consolidation scenarios, of course, enabled by virtual server or virtual PC or terminal server, even terminal server on a 64-bit client, on a 64-bit system, enabling way more users. And I don't talk about 10 more, 20 more. I talk about studies we made where we see that you can support on a terminal server scenario up to 170% more concurrent users using a high-end server as the backend, as the terminal server, doing knowledge worker work, spending their time working with products like Office, like Outlook, and Word in on a 64-bit system, but running the 32-bit applications. So this is a great story. And when we talk to developers, what we also encourage them to do as kind of the first step in application migration is to encourage them to try the 32-bit applications on a 64-bit platform. One of the key benefits, and Larry mentioned that, one of the key benefits of the x64 platform in particular is the support, the built-in support for 32-bit applications on the 64-bit platform. So 32-bit applications, the majority of applications we tested, and we expect that the vast majority of non-tested 32-bit applications will just install and run on a 64-bit system. You will see as a 32-bit application already immediate benefit. You may see it. Not in all cases, but in most cases you will see immediate benefit already because the underlying operating system being a 64-bit operating system, having more headroom for the caches, for the buffers, for the pools, result in a more stable operating system and result in faster I/O, faster data availability for applications, even for 32-bit applications on a 64-bit platform.
So it's like Solitaire run better on Win64 than...
It is, of course, applications like Solitaire. It is applications like Movie Maker. Movie Maker immediately benefiting, even though Movie Maker is a 32-bit application, it benefits from the more headroom the underlying 64-bit OS has. Yes, of course, if as an application developer or as an application you want to take advantage of all the resources that 64-bit offer, you will need to migrate to a native 64-bit world. And this is, of course, what we, as an end goal, have for our partners as well as for the majority of Microsoft applications. In some cases, like Office applications, plain Office Notebook, Movie Maker, Solitaire, it may not make sense to migrate to a native application because they perform well. The performance is way good enough for this type of application on a 64-bit platform as a 32-bit application.
I mean, a good example of that's Visual Studio itself for Whidbey.
Exactly.
We support 64-bit in Whidbey. The runtime is both native. We have a 32-bit runtime and a 64-bit runtime. Visual Studio, the application, though, is a 32-bit application. We just didn't have the time and the time frames plus all the testing and stuff you need to do. We went ahead and left that as a 32-bit application, but it can target 64-bit. So I'm running a 32-bit Visual Studio. I build a C# app. I want to run it 64-bit. I can debug it. I can see all the 64-bit registers. It looks, it's running 64-bit. It's doing all this stuff. But what's really going on is the application is actually 32-bit. But that's the migration path. The migration path was get the framework going, get all the underlying stuff so the applications run native, and then we'll move Visual Studio at a later date. And that might be, something that people do. I know some of the games developers have even done some stuff where bits of things run in the WoW while a lot of it's 64-bit native. And you just kind of have to look at your application and kind of see, from the very bottom to the very top, what layers make sense to do what with. And And it's not a hard choice. But if you can't get the whole thing there in one bite, might be pieces. But eventually, like Volker was saying, we want to get everybody there, and that's why we produced a 64-bit .NET framework. And I'm thinking I'm really excited about what we're going to deliver there. You know, partially because that's what I do, but you know, so I'm a little biased, right? You know, but also because I think it's going to give people a very straightforward way to move their code, and with the managed platform being you know, just a great way to go in general. But it also the ability to just sort of open up those horizons to people without any kind of change is going to be something I think people are going to get, especially like as mentioned to Volker before we started, especially you know, for server side applications. If you've written ASP, if you've written stuff like that, you're going to really want to move to 64-bit servers. It's a fantastic place to be, especially if you've got multiple tiers and run your database on one 64-bit machine and pull the whole thing into memory and have, you know, lots of inexpensive, because these machines aren't going to be that expensive, blades out there all running ASP. Well, maybe you can't move the whole thing over to 64-bit, but you could have half of your data center 32-bit, half of it 64-bit. It's all doing ASP and things like that. It's the same code. You just put it on those machines and it's going to run, and they're all going to work together. And that's going to be something that you have not been able to do before, and that's going to be pretty interesting. Also, if people remember with IE, if you download ActiveX controls, if you've built ActiveX controls that you download in your browser, oh, if we move to 64-bit, I got to make sure that I've built a 64-bit version of that ActiveX control so that everybody can use it. Not with managed code. That managed code, come right down, it'll run the native platform that you're looking at. So you'll never get the X because you happen to be sitting on a 64-bit machine, and that's the browser you open. So just that whole path for especially in corporations, just being able to take managed code and not having to worry about the kinds of platforms people are going to be experiencing is going to be something really great.
Yeah. But let me add to your IE story on 64-bit, because since I grew up in a non-managed world, and I'm not working on the managed code team, or the framework team, I also consider non-managed code as very important for the 64-bit platform as well as for the 32-bit platform. So if you in the 64-bit Windows world start up IE, the default IE icon will link to the 32-bit version of the Internet Explorer. This is important. It has not been always the case in early versions and early drops of the operating system. Initially, we thought it might be a good idea to launch the 64-bit version of Internet Explorer, which of course is also available on the 64-bit platform. But the scenario Larry mentioned is a very important scenario. So you download active code from your intranet or from the internet, if allowed, and install it into your IE process, which is a 32-bit process or might be a 64-bit process. If it is a 64-bit process, you run into trouble because 64-bit Windows does not support mixing different bit sizes in one process. So a process has to be either 32-bit or 64-bit. Due to the fact that most of the 32-bit binaries that ship with a 32-bit Windows OS, like IE, but also like kernel DLLs, kernel XE, etc., all these components are also available as 32-bit. There's a great deal of compatibility with 32-bit applications. So taking this IE example, you just open the Internet Explorer, navigate to the website of your choice, and if it happened to download an ActiveX control, it will just install as it would have done on a 32-bit world. You won't see the difference.
So it sounds similar to one of the problems we had with the 16-bit, 32-bit world, and that is if you were an application, and this is pre-browser, so it wasn't ActiveX controls, it was more like DLLs and COM components.
Right.
So if you're an application, let's say like Word, and you were relying upon third-party DLLs that were being brought in, whether maybe spell checker or graphing, something like that, you had to get those people to move their components to the new platform as well. Otherwise, you'd have a lot of gymnastics you'd have to go through to take and try to thunk across to those other devices.
And since you mentioned thunking, I was going to go there. We don't have thunking anymore. So unlike the 32-bit, the 16 to 32-bit transition, where we did sort of have this idea of, okay, we want to let things thunk, we sort of expressly said, thunking is bad, let's not thunk. So there aren't any hoops you can do to sort of make that happen anymore. You're going to have to migrate it to 64-bit, and that is kind of one of the differences. But that thunking thing was loads of fun. So no more thunking. That should make some people happy, but it does mean you're going to need to get all those things to be one or the other.
Yeah,
if you're gonna do
either
it.
32 or 64
64-bit,
bit,
whichever you
exactly.
choose. Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
So in a case where a vendor has multiple DLLs are using, and one of the DLLs is from a company that's out of business now, to a certain extent, like they're out of luck then, they've got to stay in the 32-bit world, or find someone else that can supply a 64-bit DLL for
To
them.
some extent, they are stuck in the 32-bit world, even though, you know, as like we said earlier, they may be able to execute their 32-bit application. In most cases, they are able to execute their 32-bit application on the 64-bit platform. And even by just running a 32-bit application, you may already see benefits. And there's a flag in the executable, in the binary file itself, in the header file itself, that tells the operating system in the 32-bit world that you can take advantage up to 3 gigabytes of memory, for example. So if you've heard about this large address-aware flag that is around, that is available in Visual Studio, in the tools, it is just a flag telling the operating system, my application understands in 32-bit up to 3 gigabytes of memory, knows how to handle that. In 64-bit, what you get immediately is an additional gigabyte. So in 64-bit Windows, each 32-bit process that has this flag set in his executable header has up to 4 gigabytes of memory available. So you are stuck kind of if you don't have a 64-bit replacement or don't have access to the source code, but you may be able to benefit from up to 4 gigabytes of memory, which is already an interesting story for most applications.
A little more headroom.
Yes, exactly, more headroom, not only for the operating system, but also for applications.
Now, my audience covers a fairly broad swath of developers, whether it's, you know, people in the trenches, enterprises, or ISVs that are writing applications for sale at CompUSA or something like that. Of the different types of applications out there, which are the ones that just out of the gate are obvious choices for going 64-bit?
The first application that immediately comes to your mind is databases. Databases benefit from large memories because they can buffer all the memory, all the information, all the tables, all the content of the tables in memory. And we have some simple demos where we show that you can improve your performance of SQL Server, for example, running SQL Server on a 32-bit box and moving it to moving the same database to SQL Server on 64-bit by, let's say, something like 500 to 1,000%, just because you get rid of the memory, the disk I/O. This is, of course, a kind of a made-up example because you won't immediately see by migrating a database to 64-bit 1,000% benefit, because it depends on how your application accesses the memory and accesses the information in the database. This is one example where we see that 64-bit benefits greatly, or applications benefit greatly from the 64-bit platform.
The next one, I think, usually for me is graphic intensive and mathematically intensive applications. So things where you're doing
Games, right?
Games, CAD, mathematics programs. If you're in college, if you're a student, and you like math CAD, that should just absolutely rock on a 64-bit platform. But that, and then as we were talking about, also sort of things like people who are interested in, who do photo stuff, things like that. If I was building, Photoshop kind of thing, or the Microsoft version, 64-bit would be very appealing to me, because the things that you can keep in memory and apply different, interesting filters, and you can keep different renditions, and you can keep just more stuff in memory. Take advantage of it, plus just the time to do those calculations, to do some of those transforms and things like that, I think are going to be there. So video editing, photo editing, games, and other mathematical kind of things like a CAD or that kind of stuff. I think all of those also sort of just scream right out of the bat. I can do something with 64-bit.
Yeah. We work with, for example, another ISV that was always dreaming about implementing a photo studio in a backpack that reporters could take into the field to do live reporting from events, etc., and having all the functionality necessary, not in a studio, but in a backpack. Something that is, due to the resource requirements of this kind of scenario, is almost impossible in 32-bit. is a really, really cool story on 64-bit because you have the resources. The systems are not expensive, especially the x64 based platforms are not more expensive than the 32-bit versions. So this ISV now can offer a studio in the backpack the reporter can take out into the field.
And my laptop's almost there.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, the laptops that they've produced so far for 64-bit stuff are amazing. I mean, just they're fantastic. Some of them have been fairly large with some interesting battery life characteristics, but the ones that I've got, like the one I have today, it has 4 USB 2.0 slots, a couple FireWire slots, DVD burner, the whole thing. Right? It's a movie production house in a thing with this massive 64-bit processor in it. And then the next rev of these things are just going to get even more amazing because you're going to start getting the dual core machines where you've basically got 2 CPUs on a single die. When you start talking about that kind of stuff coming out in a laptop, as your primary machine, just the computing power you're going to be carrying around with you is staggering. And that's the next thing that's going to happen in 64-bit that's going to get so neat is, right now it's we're sort of replacing 32-bit machines with these 64-bit machines. The 64-bit evolution goes even more. You'll get these multi-core machines and all this kind of stuff where you're talking 2 and 4 machines on processors on a die, and people just haven't carried that kind of compute power. And then you're going to start to see that the OSs are going to get really cool. The applications are going to get very interesting, and that's sort of beyond this first wave, but it's not that far away. It's going to be very interesting. And multi-core is just fantastic. Those machines are just amazingly fast.
Yeah.
So if I'm a developer out there that is doing CAD stuff, is doing database stuff, is doing memory intensive or graphic intensive or mathematical intensive sort of capabilities, and I'm thinking, gee, 64 sounds like the right thing for me to do. How soon should I start focusing my attention on getting my 32-bit application moved over to 64-bit?
So if you start thinking about moving to 64-bit today, you better be warned because you might already be too late because your competitors may already be way ahead of you and may already be available on 64-bit or may be available very soon. Over the last 12 months, we hosted quite a few ISVs, especially in the CAD, CAE area, hosted quite a few ISVs in our 64-bit hands-on lab on the Microsoft campus, helping them getting the first steps in the migration done, helping them around with some issues they had in their application code. And they announced or will announce very soon the availability of their 64-bit version on the x64 platform, for example. So if you think about migrating to 64-bit, you have to start now if you want to migrate to 64-bit, because like I said, your competitors may already be way ahead of you.
And then that covers from an ISV standpoint. You've got competitors. What if I'm an enterprise and all my energy is focused inwardly? Like say I'm Boeing and I'm thinking about rolling out 64-bit within my enterprise. How should I go about that? How should I be thinking about moving people over in my department to being a Win64?
I think the first thing you do is you start getting those machines that are 64-bit capable or 32-bit capable 64-bit machines, however you want to talk about it. You get those people, you get those machines in your enterprise, and you still run the same applications that you've got. You just start replacing those machines, and you start getting the 64-bit machines more and more prevalent. You can still run.
It just makes sense just to stop buying 32-bit machines and start buying 64-bit machines, even if you do nothing else.
That's right.
Just do that.
Just do that. And then as you start getting enough, critical mass of these machines, depending on what you're doing, if you're writing native code, you can start thinking about moving those native applications over. Or, since I'm a managed code guy, I might suggest that you start looking at maybe moving your code to managed code. And then you'll get 64-bit benefit on the ones that are 64-bit, and you can still get 32-bit out of the ones that haven't moved yet. But either way, yeah, I wouldn't buy a machine today, even for my home, and I didn't. I wouldn't buy a machine today that didn't have the chips in it that can support the 64-bit stuff. That's all that's going to be available here pretty soon. And right now, you still can get a few, but for the most part, yeah. If I'm buying, not maybe a laptop. Laptops today still there's a lot of good 32-bit laptops, and they're not. The 64-bit ones are definitely a little more specialized in what they're targeting, but they're getting there really fast. But desktop machines, absolutely. I think I wouldn't buy anything but that. In fact, for our group, that's all we buy. For devs, tests, everybody, we just buy 64-bit machines because it doesn't make sense not to.
Yeah, and if you are talking about enterprise customers, first step, like Larry said, you go and buy 64-bit 32-bit capable 64-bit hardware, run your 32-bit OS, and start introducing the 64-bit operating system in areas where you may see benefits by consolidating multiple domain controllers onto one system, or many domain controllers onto few domain controllers, by introducing the 64-bit platform, because features like Active Directory, functionality like Active Directory, and the management infrastructure, all this is compatible between 32-bit and 64-bit. In fact, Microsoft uses 64-bit as one of their consolidation platforms for our in-house domain controllers. So we reduced the huge amount of domain controllers that we have, as you can imagine, and reduced them to way less domain controllers by just introducing the 64-bit platform and running high-end 64-bit x64 or Itanium hardware as our domain controllers.
Okay, so where's the best resource for people to go to then if they really want to find out more information about, what is Win64 and how do they get started developing their applications or migrating their enterprise departments over to it?
Yeah. So for IT Pro, I think the start page for everybody who wants to know more about, learn more about 64-bit is Microsoft.com/64bit. For developers, we have MSDN, Microsoft.com/64bit is the website you want to start with 64-bit if you think about developing. There are on Microsoft.com/Windows Server, you'll find a bunch of information, lots of information about 32-bit, but also about 64-bit. We posted our recent case studies around 64-bit, so if you want to see what ISVs or what enterprises did when migrating, when introducing 64-bit, you'll find very, very helpful case studies and white papers available on the Microsoft website. So Microsoft.com/64bit or MSDN Microsoft.com/64bit is definitely a good starting point if you start thinking about 64-bit today.
And off the MSDN side, also the .NET Framework, there's a 64-bit link off of there. And then grab the beta Visual Studio 2.0 and start building both unmanaged and managed applications for all platforms, but 64-bit specifically, yeah.
But now, if on the framework, it doesn't really matter whether it's 64-bit or not, why do you need a 64-bit section on the framework side of things?
Mostly so we can link to a lot of these case studies. and see some blogs and some other stuff about some of those gotchas around unmanaged code. The biggest thing we see in the framework are the gotchas around interacting with unmanaged code and just making sure that people understand what it means to pull in COM controls or to be p-invoking to things that aren't necessarily OS components that might not exist in both worlds. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff just to walk people through some of the gotchas.
Are there any good blogs out there that talk about 64-bit?
There are a few.
Yeah, there are a few blogs about 64-bit. I think you have a blog about the framework. Josh Williams has a blog about 64-bit. So blogs msdn.com/Josh Will.
And then Jason Zander's done a couple.
Jason Zanders, exactly. Or if you go to blog msdn.com/Volker W. This is my 64-bit blog, so I'm blogging about 64-bit stuff.
And Chris Broom and Vance, I think, have both blogged about the memory model. Itanium has a very interesting memory model. So people, if they're building unmanaged code on Itanium, I highly recommend them for them to read the memory model instructions because there's some interesting things with that platform and unmanaged code. We try to shield you from it in the managed world, but of course the runtime's a lot of unmanaged code, so we have to know about it. But developers are going to want to know about that, especially if they're writing C and C++. Unmanaged, they're going to want to understand that memory model because it can. It doesn't bite you when you compile, and it doesn't bite you every time you run. It was one of those things that'll bite you when you put the thing under load. So people want to know about that, and there's a couple really good blogs out there about that as well.
Yeah, and if you're interested in migrating your application and want to find out where I can get help from Microsoft, when's the next hands-on labs, for example, or when can I find a training lab in my area, or when can I expect something like that, we have an alias for that, which is go64@microsoft.com. So you can send email, ask questions, no technical questions, but questions where you can find answers to your technical questions. So when's the next 64-bit hands-on lab, for example, you'll find answers there.
Okay.
And then also off MSDN, we have a number of those webcasts that we've done as well.
This is
There's
true.
webcasts,
Yep.
the unmanaged, managed webcasts, as well as some Q&A sessions as well. So there's a lot of that available out there. Lots of good stuff.
End of last year, we did a series of, I think, 13 or 14 webcasts explicitly focusing on 64-bit, and these webcasts are all still available for download in the webcast section on MSDN. Yes, correct.
Okay, well, great. I mean, I think it's a lot of great information that our developers can take and focus on for better understanding and realizing how they can move themselves, their applications, and their friends, wives, kids, families, and everything else onto
grandparents.
64-bit. Well, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So hopefully that gives you some insight on what 64-bit Windows is all about and why it might be applicable to you to look at it for developing your applications on, migrating your applications to, as well as running in the future. Thanks.
Welcome back to this week's episode of Developer Fear Factor. Now, it's been 6 weeks weeding out all the other teams, and now we're down to the toughest coders I've ever seen. All right, dudes, are you ready to get it on? All right, dudes, we've saved the best for last. We call it Tinkerbell's Cage. And it's the only thing between you and $1 million. Tinkerbell is our Fear Factor mascot. Over 4 pounds of fear-inducing fury. Oh, and one more thing. She's brought along some friends. Now, this challenge is about dramatically improving user productivity. One of you will be at this workstation and must write an application that accesses your company's CRM system. Now, this application must access and manipulate data from not one, but two back-end CRM systems using web services. It should display data in an easy-to-sort and filter list. You know, if you really want to win, you should probably just write this on top of Excel itself. And to simulate the pressure of running an application on a deadline, we'll put the second team member into Tinkerbell's cage with a stake tied around her neck. Just complete the client app before your partner loses the stake, and hopefully nothing else, to Tinkerbell and her friends, and you win the $1 million. Red team, you ready? Oh, yeah. Blue team, you ready? Yeah. Well, ready or not, you won the toss. You're up first. Let's go.
Yeah, it's been a long 6 weeks. But we are definitely going to be walking all over these guys on this.
When it comes to knowing worker productivity and improving utilization of IT resources and making it easier to connect services, we are it. I mean, we know how to access data and functionality with web services.
Yeah, we know. They've won all the other challenges. But this is the moment we've waited our whole lives for. This is a serious coding challenge, and this is where our C++ coding skills will definitely give us the edge.
All right, blue team. A client app leveraging all the richness of Excel is all you need to win $1 million. Are you ready? Set, go!
I just gotta bone up a little on these comm interfaces.
Oh, look at those dogs go. Ooh, Tinkerbell almost got him on that one. You better hurry with that app.
Fascinating. Hey, did you know there's not only an iSmart Tag Recognizer Site interface, there's also an iSmart Tag Recognizer Site 2 interface? Finish the out! Finish the out!
Oh, he's down! He's down!
I can't! It's just too much code! Not enough time! Only 14 interfaces left! Oh, for the love of God! Hurry up! I'm on line 200! Only 15,000 lines left of code to go!
Oh, that is ugly. All right, boys, you're up next.
Well, we definitely don't want to seem cocky or anything, but we have won all the other challenges.
The Office Smart Client value proposition is just our way of life.
See, Office Smart Clients provide IT pros with easy deployment and management, and efficiently uses IT resources.
Yeah, and don't forget our secret weapon. Visual Studio Tools for Office. See, VSTO makes Office Smart Client development easy, and it gives you all the power of .NET.
It's how you win.
Yeah, it's how you win.
know, guys, I think Tinkerbell looks hungrier now than she did before. Are you ready to face the fear? All right, one smart document on the way. Ready, set, let's go!
Forget it like you got me!
Easy.
Wait!
Unbelievable, you're done already? Unbelievable, simply unbelievable. A new Fear Factor record, and you guys win the $1 million. Now, how on earth did you do it? How did you create an app that fast?
Well, like we said earlier, it's all about Office Smart Client. See, they've revolutionized the way that workers can accomplish tasks and the way that client applications are designed and built. Using VSTO, .NET, and the standard XML support in Office, it's easy to connect industry-standard web services with Office applications.
Well, obviously for you, fear was not a factor. But how about you? Did you know he had this up his sleeve?
Yeah, I knew it all along. You see, Office Smart Clients combine the best features of rich and thin architecture on the same existing Office platform. And by connecting Office to back-end systems and data, you can create solutions with impact and in record time.
Amazing. Congratulations to you both. Not only do you win the $1 million, but you get to keep the meat.
All right,
Well, that does it for Developer Fear Factor. See you next week.
Welcome back. Now, Larry and Volker told you why Win64 is important. Now, Kevin Frei is going to show us how you can take and actually develop applications to make them work on Win64. Thanks, Kevin.
Hi.
Now, Larry and Volker were kind of basically saying that it's basically just a recompile. So if that's all it is, I mean, we've got maybe a 5-minute segment here, right?
Yeah. It takes about that long. So I have a little project. This is a personal project of mine to keep track of all my music, and I can build up playlists and transcode them so I can put them on a CD, or I can format them to play on an iPod or on a Windows Media Player or on my Pocket PC or whatever. And this is a 32-bit project, and I've already built it. But when I built it, I turn on the warnings, 64-bit warnings, and in that you get to this is would-be beta 2 actually.
Which just came out.
Just came out. That's right. That's right. In here, you can turn on the. I gotta remember where it goes. Oh, no, lost it. There it is. Detect 64-bit portability warnings. So you turn that on, and your 32-bit project, if it builds cleanly with that, and actually this one has a few warnings, but I've gone through and made sure they were all okay. If it builds cleanly with the 64-bit warnings, chances are you're going to be able to recompile it, and it'll just work. There are, of course, a few gotchas, but most projects that I've been involved with, it has just been a matter of recompiling, and you're done.
So some of these warnings that are popping up there, what sort of warnings were they poking out at?
When you convert an integer or an int64 down to a smaller type, a size t is one of the fundamental types in C++, and a size t is 64 bits on the 64-bit platform. It's 32 bits on the 32-bit platform, and a lot of times people just convert those down. Those frequently you can ignore, and that's what almost all of those are. The warnings are actually in library code that I'm using. The ones that you have to watch out for when you're converting a pointer and storing it in an integer, because an integer is only 32 bits. Even on the 64-bit platform, and so you're going to truncate that, and then that won't work. But as long as you've verified that your pointers are all being stored in pointer types, you should be good to go. The API itself hasn't changed. This is nothing like the 16 to 32-bit conversion where you had the memory models and all that. This is much easier. So I just built my my 32-bit project. Well, I can come up here and normally if I've already created it, but you can just come in the configuration manager and you can do give me a new project. Oh, I'll create an Itanium version of this as well. That's all you have to do to create the new platform. And then I don't actually have all the Itanium libs built yet, so we'll do the 64-bit, the x64 project here, and build that guy. Oh, that one's already been built. Let's build the retail one. The main problem that people have found when they're porting is really third-party libraries. There's a lot of third-party libraries are starting to show up now. This project that I'm building uses Boost. The latest versions of Boost actually do have scripts to build the 64-bit runtime. I also use one called Win32 GUI. That one also builds cleanly. If you don't have access to the source, that's the real problem. Most folks, though, will be willing to provide that for you. You just need to contact your library vendors. So this machine I'm on is actually a 64-bit laptop. So
a pretty slick-looking 64-bit laptop.
Yeah, it
too.
is. It's a
red Ferrari.
It's a Acer Ferrari laptop. Yeah. So this box, all the code that I'm building here, it is AMD64 code, and I can run that on this box and debug it directly from Whidbey. Now Whidbey actually supports. It actually runs the 32-bit version of the development product. It's running under what's called the WoW64 layer, which is a way of running 32-bit applications on 64.
WoW standing for Windows on Windows.
Windows on Windows 64, and because of that, we had to jump through a few little hoops originally in order to successfully debug a 64-bit application. But Beta 1 of Whidbey kind of got rid of most of those. Well, Beta 2 makes it completely transparent. You don't have to do anything. You install the product on a 64-bit box, and it sets up everything so that you can just hit F5 and start your project, and you can go in and see all the 64-bit registers. You can see that you're actually running 64-bit code.
So is this your daily development machine right now, or?
My daily development machine it's got a bit more horsepower. Okay. I have a 4-proc machine that I actually develop on. So, but this is an awfully nice box for running around, and it gets a pretty good battery life, and definitely more horsepower than any other laptops out there right now. The 64-bit laptops are really convenient.
How much code have you personally been converting from 32-bit to 64-bit?
Well, I was involved in the bring up of the native compiler. There's about we have on the order of a few million lines of code, I think, are involved in all of the tool set. I've also been involved in the OS bring up, primarily as compiler support, but we wound up dealing with a lot of things that in that space there are a lot of other issues, right, when you're talking about the operating system. I've also worked with a lot of ISVs, been involved in some of the porting labs that we've had here at Microsoft, and the ISVs, most of them have had they find a few problems if they use some of our older technologies. There are a few things that we don't have real good stories for, but most of the time they can come in and be pretty successful. The primary gotchas that we found, VBA is not available on 64-bit, and so there's some engineering effort to use VBA in an application, and then there's a few other issues that people find where the 64-bit compilers, they're much more conformant to C++ than if they're using VC6, for example. So moving from their 32-bit VC6 code to the VC80 compiler, there's a lot of work that's just strictly conformance work. And then there's a third-party library issue. Those are only the significant issues that we've really found.
Now, so if I had an existing base of 32-bit application code, I'm like Ford Motor Company or General Electric or something like that, and I'm going to take and convert this over to 64-bit. What do you think my time estimates should be on getting that code across? Am I going to spend a lot of time really digging into the code and debugging some of the things, doing code reviews, making sure all the pointer stuff are right? Or if I was coding it right to begin with in the 32-bit world, where I shouldn't be using pointer arithmetic, should it be simply just bring the code up, port it across?
It really should. If you're already on a more recent compiler, if you're using, for example, VC7 or VC7.1, you're really in a pretty good state. Both of those compilers support the 64-bit warning, so you turn that on and work through those warnings. And once you've gotten your code building with that, you're probably looking at it's not an unmeasurable effort to do the port. You'll wind up finding a few gotchas. There's a lot of documentation out there, a lot of help. There's a lot of my team has actually been involved with customers, big ISVs. I've helped people from all over the world with this stuff. But we're willing to help people. This is a great platform that I have a strong emotional investment in this platform. It's been a lot of fun. And so if people have problems, please come to us. We're really behind this platform.
So even the current versions of Visual C support the 64-bit warnings.
Yes. Yeah.
So without getting 64-bit chip, without getting the 64-bit OS, today with my existing tools, I can at least find out whether or not my code is possibly going to be automatically compatible with 64-bit. So I mean, that's something good story right there.
Yeah. That's the first step. I mean, if you can write your code so that there's none of those warnings, you've already taken the biggest. That's really probably the most difficult step most people have, and that they can actually solve themselves. The third-party libraries, then they're just that can be a problem if they're just stuck waiting. But
so since Win64 brings some new things to the table, such as larger amounts of memory and stuff like that, are there things that you'd want to take advantage of in your application here to say, hey, since I'm running on Win64, I might as well take advantage of these things that would prevent it from getting ported back down again into Win32?
You know, there can be a lot of stuff like that, though, you can abstract away. So one of the things that some people find to be a real win is to be able to use memory mapped files so that you no longer have to do real file I/O. You just map your entire file in. So you can abstract that away and have a common interface. At the same time, if what you're doing really wins on the 64-bit space, there's already enough market penetration of these machines that you're not really restricting yourself as far as your customers. If you have something that really is going to be a performance win, it's not going to be a very hard story in a year to say you need a 64-bit machine. Both AMD and Intel have committed to both. I mean, they're going to have parts in every possible market here that are 64-bit compatible. AMD has servers, workstations, all the way down to laptops. I know they're working on the 7 notebooks. Intel is moving toward the notebook space. Is the only space that they don't yet have a part, and they will very soon. So there's really a lot of hardware available, and if your application gets real performance wins, I don't think it's a bad story to say you need a 64-bit system to run this stuff.
I mean, plus if you just now came out with a new version of your application, chances are by the time your next version comes out, 64-bit systems are going to be the standard to a certain extent.
Yeah.
I mean, we heard Larry and Volker talking about the fact that even today it makes sense to just go ahead and buy a 64-bit system because they cost about as much, as a good solid desktop machine is going to cost, and they still run the 32-bit operating system. They still run 32-bit applications.
Yeah.
And upgrading it to 64-bit Windows is free. So it doesn't make any sense not to.
Yeah, even both AMD and Intel have very affordable entry-level 64-bit boxes that are just really good performers.
So what exactly does your application do?
So this is just a little application that I wrote for managing my music. It reads in a bunch of music off of a share. It reads all the MP3s or WMAs that I have there, and it can output various playlists. I have a description of, I like this artist and my wife likes that artist, or my wife doesn't like that, and I can mix and match these songs. So I have a whole bunch of Sesame Street stuff for my kids, and I don't really want to hear that at work. So this thing goes through and filters music and builds up custom playlists. So it'll also transcode music from MP3 to WMA or to WAV so that I can burn a CD with it. And it also has the ability to go in and actually add and remove artists from playlists and whatnot. I'm working on the UI right now. I'm kind of a text guy, so this is all work in progress. I haven't done much done much graphical programming before, so this is kind of my little learning project.
Well, you're still not doing any graphical programming there.
Yeah,
It's kind of boxes.
It's pretty ugly, I know. I know. I'm just getting started. So, but the program itself is really it's algorithm heavy. It does lots of set manipulation and lots and lots of text processing. And this stuff it runs about 30% faster on the same box, 64-bit versus 32-bit. So that's a win. One of the gotchas with 64-bit programming is because your pointers are bigger, your working set can go up. One of the poster children for this is actually the project I work on officially, the native compiler. We use lots and lots of pointers, and so when we're actually building, when we're hosted on the 64-bit runtime, we actually have a working set that's almost double because we have so many pointers. And so despite the fact that we have the wider registers and we have more registers, we run at about the same speed. You know, the WoW64 that we talked about earlier is really a good solution if you really don't have need of the 64-bit, the added power and the added memory for 64-bit space. Just using the WoW64 is a good solution to get good performance, and you're hosted on a 64-bit machine. One advantage of actually running on the 64-bit OS is you still have access to a full 4 gig address space, whereas when you're running actually just normal Windows XP, you only have access to 2 gigs easily. You can reboot and get 3, but under the WoW64 layer, you do get full 4 gigabytes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm assuming, are using Win64 as your daily environment you're always in?
Yeah, been doing that for about 2 years now.
Which also means you're running an awful lot of non-64-bit applications because all the applications have been ported across yet.
Yeah.
Do you notice any problems with them? Are they problems that were in the early versions of the platform? But
there have been. I was probably one of the first to really do the self-hosting thing where I'm working in it, and there have been lots of little problems. I haven't seen anything significant in at least 6 months. The .NET runtime, I can run 32-bit. The .11 or the 1.1 version of the runtime, I can run those 32-bit apps just fine. I can run 64-bit .NET runtime apps. Office just runs. The main thing that I notice is if I use the 64-bit Internet Explorer, I don't get nearly as much as many ads and stuff like that.
Oh, there you go.
Because there's no
ActiveX controls.
Yeah, the ActiveX controls are all 32-bit, so that's really not a bad way to browse the web. It does have actually both Internet Explorers. There's 2 Internet Explorers in the Win64. You've got your 64-bit and your 32-bit. And the 32-bit is definitely useful because then you do get all the ActiveX controls. Mm-hmm. There's generally good reasons for those, mm-hmm. but yeah, that's the only gotcha that I generally see in my day-to-day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we talked about that earlier with Larry. About the fact that when we moved from 16-bit to 32-bit, you had the thunking layer that you could take and include 16-bit DLLs in your 32-bit application, but how in Win64 we really don't have that thunking layer built into it. And if you're going to go 64-bit, all of the components you're using also need to come up to the 64-bit side as well.
Yeah, that's true. There are some ways around it, but you have to do it using inter-process communication. You can have a 32-bit process that hosts those 32-bit DLLs, but it's a much heavier weight sort of solution. Yeah. I've really found that when people go that route, they've had just one thing they could not do in 64-bit. They didn't have the third-party library or something, and so they wanted to be able to at least do testing. There are also a few situations where it is useful to have access to both 32 and 64-bit things. Mm-hmm. But yeah, most everything just works. I haven't found anything that is just a showstopper. Drivers are still trickling in, but they're definitely there for new hardware. I don't have any new hardware that I don't have good solid drivers. Video drivers are there, network controller drivers are there, sound devices. It's all available, and it's been pretty exciting.
Mm-hmm. From a language standpoint, you're showing this was in C++. It
Mm-hmm.
looked like. I'm assuming that for the .NET framework we have C# and VB.NET and stuff like that work perfectly fine because of IL stuff.
Yeah.
What about non-C++, non-framework based languages?
So we have there's several companies actually working on Fortran compiler. I believe there's a COBOL compiler. PGI and PathScale, I believe, are working on compilers as well. Let's see. I think that there is 64-bit Perl, for example. I've heard rumors of Python, but I don't pay attention to that space much. But there's lots of work there.
So, you know, the main thing there'd be, you know, if you're using a non-Microsoft supplied language, one of your projects, something like that, probably a good idea for you to check with your vendor to find out whether or not they're doing a 64-bit version of it. And if they aren't, ask them why not, and say, hey, I'm going to drop you then if you aren't using a 64-bit version. That's the way the world's going, you know.
Yeah, I do expect that the tools vendors are. I mean, all tools vendors I know of are working on or have something already available in the 64-bit space. So there's really there's no serious barriers to entry here. We are still kind of gaining critical mass. The third-party library is really the gotcha right now, but I suspect that will probably fall from the radar of problems within the next few months. So
I mean, that happened pretty quickly on the 16 to 32-bit side as well. It was a big issue with a lot of people. But then as soon as people realized that, gee, everyone's going 32 bits, all the libraries came along as well.
Yeah.
And we're seeing that in the 64-bit world now too. If there's one application you'd like to see running as a native Win64 application, what would it be?
One application. Probably Photoshop. Yeah, it's just it's big enough that and I'd like to see that one, but I happen to know that Adobe is working on that, so that's their.
And you know, that sort of application makes sense.
Yeah,
I mean,
Photoshop is one of those that really does get you. There's databases as well.
Yeah.
They get real good wins from going 64-bit.
Yeah. Okay. What sort of resources do you recommend to people if they're a developer and they're wanting to take and move their application over to 64-bit?
Well, you need a decent box, but anything out there is gonna be fast enough. Any 64-bit CPU that you can buy right now is gonna have enough horsepower to do builds. There's just CPUs are getting fast enough that it's not a big deal. Pick up the Would-Be Beta 2. It's a really good development environment, and you can run it on your 64-bit box. There's no problems there. So running Would-Be, you can actually get a Go Live license, so you can actually build your applications, ship them prior to Would-Be actually shipping, and then when Would-Be ships, using the Go Live license requires that you do purchase that and then go ahead and ship your app with the released.
So that's what the Beta 2 that just came out.
Yeah.
So you could actually get that Beta 2, develop your application for Win64 or even Win32, and release it, sell it to the world, even though it's still in the beta phase.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
What about information resources? Or is developing a Win64 application so easy that if you know Win32, you don't need to worry about it?
There's very little differences. There are a few, and it's just kind of fringe areas. Memory management, really low-level memory management is a little bit different. Exception handling, if you have to support exception handling at a low level, that's quite a bit different actually. But from just a language perspective, it's almost identical. If you have questions, there's a set of bloggers out there. I'm among them that just post random. You know, if I get a question, I generally post something on my blog about, hey, somebody had this problem. Look around on the MSDN blogs. There's a lot of good stuff there. A lot of my coworkers and I actually help out there. MSDN has some good stuff. The Windows x64 website also has some good information about it.
Okay. Well, is there any final words you want to take and give our audience?
I'm just glad this is shipped, and I'm looking forward to getting real applications running on this hardware.
Yeah, well, you're developing a real application. I mean, you got it right there.
Not
Sometimes
really.
the most useful ones are the ones we develop ourselves.
That's true. Yeah, I'm just excited for this platform to get out there and have a life of its own. I've been involved with it for so long. It's almost all of my Microsoft life here. So.
Well, thanks for joining us, Kevin.
All right, thanks a lot.
Thank you. So hopefully from that you saw how easy it is to take an application that is a Win32 application and convert it over to Win64 and make it just run. You should make sure you take your existing applications using the existing version of Microsoft Visual C, test it with the 64-bit switch to find out whether or not it's safe with 64-bit, and then you should take and move your application to be a Win64 application as well. Well, thanks for joining us.
Everyone knows it's the admins who really run Microsoft. With me today is Nancy Malm. She is Executive Assistant at Microsoft. Nancy, welcome.
Thank you.
So why don't you tell us who you work for and what group?
I work for Yusuf Mehdi. He's the Senior VP of MSN Information Services and Merchant Platform.
Okay.
So we're MSN, the homepage, we're all the content on it, business development, MSNBC.
Okay.
Pretty much if you see it on MSN, that's us.
That's your team. And so what's it like being an executive admin?
Hectic comes to mind. I love it. I have a wonderful boss. He's a marvelous man to work with. Good team, good people, really good team of admins. But it's a frantic job. There's a lot of chasing things down. You know, their use of schedule changes constantly. A lot of requests for his time, a lot of prioritizing, a lot of working with him to make sure that I know where he really needs to be. Because if he were everywhere that people want him, there'd have to be 10 of him.
Right.
And that'd be on a good day.
So what would describe an average day for you?
I usually get there about an hour before he does to make sure that I've got all my ducks in a row, and preferably in a straight row. Make sure that I know where he's supposed to be, if there's any backup information for meetings. Make sure nothing's changed overnight. And frequently there are late emails saying this meeting needs to change, this person has to be there. Can you make it 4 hours longer? When Yusuf gets there, we usually get a couple of minutes to chat in the morning, make sure that he knows where he's supposed to be. And then the rest of the day is spent fixing up the next day, scheduling for 2 months out, dealing with the little emergencies that come up every day, talking to people on the phone, chasing things down, basically.
And so you probably have like the straight insight on what really goes on in the team. That's what I've found is the admins know who all the people are and what goes on. And
I like to think I do. It's a fun view because you see everything from the top. I see what's going on in all of our groups as opposed to knowing what a particular group is doing. So it's a fun job. I love it.
Now, have you always worked for Yusuf at Microsoft?
Nope, I've been here, it'll be 12 years next week. Started as a receptionist in 1993. Moved on to a group assistant job for a short period of time and then into an admin job. And in 1995, became admin for Brad Chase, who was at that point Windows 95 marketing. Stayed with him until he left the company, and when Yusuf came into his job as his successor, I stayed right there in the job.
Okay.
Stayed there in the office too. Didn't even have to move.
That was convenient.
I made Yusuf move upstairs.
And so what kind of things did you do before Microsoft?
I've always worked retail, or I had always worked retail before that. I'm a fabric addict and did something which you should never do. I worked in my addiction. I worked in a fabric store before that. But I spent 11 years living on Maui previous to that. I worked in a small grocery store. I worked as a baker. I ran a small sawmill for a short time. Lived up in Alaska, did some gold mining. Worked at a tuxedo and costume shop, the only one in the state of Alaska. So I did a lot of just fun things for a long time and then decided it was time to get a real job.
So how did gold mining fit in there?
Quite well. It was fun. I spent 2 months living in a small tent in the middle of nowhere in Alaska, mining for gold.
Did you find anything?
A little bit, but I'd do it again in a minute. It was so much fun. It didn't really matter that we came out not making any money. It was just really a good time.
That's really fun.
Because I was a lot younger then, so who knows if I could actually spend 2 months living in a tent in Alaska at this point. But I enjoyed it.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it was a fun time.
So I take it fabrics, or what are some other things you like to do outside of work?
Well, I've sort of put the sewing on hold because I now have gardens. I've never been a gardener, but I now have lots and lots of gardens at my new home. And I have transferred my addiction. I'm now a plant addict. The fabric stores don't see much of me, but the nurseries are really very familiar to me. I'm familiar to them. So I spend a lot of time working out in the garden in the winter. I spend a lot of time thinking about what I'm going to put in the garden in the spring, trying to figure out how to keep the deer from eating the garden. So gardening is the current fun thing, and I spend a lot of time with my family.
Is there a particular plant or something you have going on in your garden now that you're particularly proud of?
Not so much proud of, but it's fun to watch what else is coming up. I planted most things in the fall. I have no idea what I planted. I ordered them because they look pretty and the deer wouldn't eat them. So every day after work now I go out and walk around and check and see what's growing and then wait to see what happens when it blooms, because a lot of them I still don't have any idea what they are. So I can't wait for summer when everything's all pretty and flowery.
It's a big surprise.
It's green. It will be. It's my surprise garden. Looking forward to it.
That's great. What would you say is, what is the most challenging thing about your job? You said, sounds like maybe organizing the schedule and keeping everything on track.
I think the biggest challenge is making sure that the right things are on the calendar, because what the right thing is this week, it may be by the time that meeting comes along next week or the week after, things have changed. There's something that's more important. Sometimes I get to the point where I'm prioritizing emergencies. You know, if you're bleeding to death, you may get in, but if you're, you know, bleeding to death quickly, oh fine, then you're going to get on the calendar. I mean, it's prioritizing emergencies. Things come up, things that are unforeseen. People fail to plan ahead. So mostly it's a matter of making sure that everything gets on the calendar that needs to, and he gets everything done he needs to. And I'm not quite sure how he does it. The man has no free time.
What are some things that you think would surprise people about what it's like to be a vice president at Microsoft?
I'm not certain. I think most people realize it's a hard job. I think what a lot of people don't realize, and I've been working with VPs for so long that I sort of forget it, is that they are no different than everybody else, and there's no need to be afraid of meeting with a VP or being all worked up because you have a meeting with them. All these guys have been PMs and GMs and testers and developers. They've all been in the position that everybody else is in now. So going into a meeting with a VP shouldn't be a scary thing. But because this is the VP and this is the person who has the power, everybody gets all worked up about going into meetings with them. And I've just worked with VPs for so long. I'm very impressed by them, but I'm not scared. They don't scare me.
Well, that's good. You need that.
You do.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Well, that's great. Well, Nancy, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for asking me. I was really very honored. So thank you very much.
And that brings us to the end of another episode of the .NET Show.
And stay tuned for the next episode on Windows management.
And until then, we'll see you on the web.